Right, this is the Committee of Ways and Means. This is Monday, October 15th, 2018. We're 6 p.m. I have Councilor McKinnon. Here. I got Councilor Matusky. Here. I have Councilor McLaughlin.
Present.
And I have Councilor Simonelli. We have 4 members present. We do have a quorum.
Please stand and salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please read the only piece of business we have.
The only piece of business on the agenda. This is item number 1, order offered by Councilor Peter Napolitano as president, that the amount of $9,380,000 be appropriated by borough as requested in the CIP general fund budget.
Before I open it up to the floor, councilors, we have Mr. Demas in the audience here. Could we just have Mr. Demas make a motion to have him up before us so we explain? And also
Mr. Souza.
Mr. Souza. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. You have done so. Gentlemen, please state your name for the record and titles.
Eric Demas, CFO.
Thank you.
Tony Sousa, Planning Director.
Thank you. We spoke in the back, Mr. Demas. Could you just explain a little bit on this piece of, there was a point where it was, I believe, up near the area of 12 million, and now it's at 9, in the area of 9,938,000. So could you just explain the difference on that?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. There was a question earlier in the back as to individuals thought that the amount of the FY19 CIP was greater than the council order before you, and that is correct. So just for the people at home, the way the CIP process works is that during the annual budget process, the capital improvement plan, the 5-year capital improvement plan, is updated every year and submitted for city council for acceptance. That happened in this past year just like it does every year. The difference is when the city council accepts that, there's no appropriation, there's no authorization to spend. By charter, it still requires council vote for each and every authorization. Back in June, there were some time-sensitive projects that were included in the original CIP submission. Those had been acted upon and put before City Council for actual authorization to spend. That took place in June. The item before you right now are a number of parks and traffic projects in which the mayor is requesting authorization to spend. But the item before you does not include all of the items that were submitted in the original FY19 CIP. The reason being is there are a large number of vehicles that were included in the CIP that was accepted, but not yet requested as, to be authorized to spend. The mayor's currently in the process going through and meeting with each and every department head, making them justify their needs for additional vehicles. So there are no vehicles that are included in this appropriation. So I'm anticipating at least one more authorization request to come before City Council to clean up the year
for
end.
vehicles and stuff?
It would be,
Okay.
yes.
Now, well, it's good to see that we're actually coming up to, what, 21st century, somewhat? Using your words in the back.
That we are.
Also, these items here, these are all bond items that are going out?
Yes.
Okay.
Everything that is included in this order is an authorization to
bond.
for the city to go out and bond these projects.
And these bonds wouldn't impact us till when?
I'm taking, from a fiscal appropriation standpoint, you would not have, if we issue debt, which we traditionally do, February, March, April timeframe, it's usually the best time for us to issue. We only issue debt once a year. If that's the case, then your first payments don't actually come due until fiscal 20.
Sure.
And as I go through and I look at each of these, I believe everyone on here is listed as a 10-year bond authorization
Okay.
to be paid over the next 10 years.
And these were already approved by us, actually, the whole body at one point, correct?
Well, they were accepted in the initial CIP.
Accepted, okay. And these right here, this would not have an impact on anything done this year, correct?
Not in the fiscal 19, that is
Okay.
correct.
All right. Thank you. Councilman McLaughlin?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I have some questions on this. You said this will not impact fiscal year 2019, but if we're paying some of these loan payments in February, March, April, what fiscal year does that money come out of?
Well, the authorization,
Authorization.
and the issuance of the debt would be this upcoming spring, the February, March, April timeframe. Traditionally, the way our debt is structured is that those first interest payments come due 6 months thereafter. So there would not be an additional appropriation needed to pay debt service during this fiscal year.
So in FY 2018, we will see zero cost to be able to to go forward with these projects? Is that what you're telling me?
FY 19. FY 18 closed this
Yeah,
past
sorry.
June.
Right, exactly.
So
I
just so that
apologize.
we're all on the same
I
page. But for
apologize.
FY 19, yes, you're absolutely correct. There would be no debt service that would come due until probably the earliest would be August or September, which puts us into fiscal 20.
Because July 1 is the end of the fiscal year. So no cost incurred in FY 2019 for what we're going to vote for or support tonight, hopefully, and move forward. Is that?
Well, just to clarify. and
I just want to clarify that there is no
there'd be
payment.
There would be no supplemental appropriation that would be needed to cover any debt service in fiscal 19. Certainly, if you authorize, we would be spending these funds, some of this before year end. But it would
And
be
how
through
much
the
would
bond.
how much would that never be?
Well, it'd be through the bond authorization. I don't know how the bidding process would work. Mr. Souza does have a timeline of when we want to put a lot of these items out to bid, late winter, early spring. So just to be clear, if approved, we would be spending money during this fiscal year.
That's what I wanted.
However, it would be through the bond authorization and funded through the bond. There would be no supplemental appropriation needed in our operating budget for fiscal 19.
Right, there'll be no additional funds needed, but there will be funds allocated through FY 2019's budget to get these projects off the ground and moving forward.
Well, it would be the bond authorization.
The bond
It would be outside of the general fund. All of our bonding projects are handled outside of the general fund in their own separate capital project funds.
They would be bonded?
Everything before you,
What I'm trying to get.
the
what I'm trying
authorization
to
is
get
the
to, Mr.
bonding
Reese, is
authorization.
We know that there's a black cloud sort of hanging over our heads right now, if you will, on some financial matters that are going to be facing us in the next couple of weeks. I want to make sure that we are taking our time and thoroughly thinking about this process before we are voting to support or not to support funding on maybe a project that we could hold off. Any one of these items, I don't know, maybe we can hold off on a couple of park construction projects until FY 2020, when we know fiscal times in our city are going to be different, and there's going to be, funding of money that's going to be new, additional funding. Maybe there is a couple of things that we can hold off on. Maybe there's not. Maybe we need to do all of these projects. But I think with the black cloud sort of hanging over our head, I think all my colleagues know what I'm referring to. I mean, there's a discussion right now in the city at $2.5 million money cost that is being debated on where it is spent. I want to make sure that we are paying attention to this closely tonight, because when the taxpayers come and ask us why we voted to support park construction projects and not support additional funding for our schools or for anybody, I want to make sure that we are thoroughly thinking about this process. So
Sure.
that's what and I know you're concerned about it, and I know that you think about this all day, every day. I know you live, breathe, and dream this. So that's what I'm trying to figure out, where we're going with this, and I think it's a great opportunity to have an open discussion about this right now, and about if there's anything we can maybe pull it on the back burner, and for maybe even just for 30 days, until we figure out what we're going to do with the cost of the financial matter that is facing us right now. And that's why I want to get your opinion on what projects you may or may think that we could or could not desperately go forward with. Or can we postpone this for 2 weeks? Can we discuss this in 2 weeks and see where we are at that point? Maybe, I don't know what my colleagues want to do. But I think that it's worth the discussion to be had, because I think we're in shallow waters right now. I think we're in an uncertain area right now of which direction we're going, because I think this is the tough year. I think this 2019, as we all know, and you've been telling us since you showed up in our city, and kudos to you, that this was going to be our tough year, that this was going to be the year that we need to really be careful on how we spent money, because it wasn't going to be like in the future years to come. So I just want to make sure that we're thinking about that. And if you have an opinion.
Certainly. So to the crux of your question, as to the other financial issue, and I actually don't think it's appropriate to discuss right
You
now.
don't even need
So-
to discuss it.
So we'll
It's
speak
okay
in
with me.
generalities.
Yeah, absolutely.
But to the crux of your question, what you're actually asking, if these bond authorizations were approved, it would have absolutely zero impact on FY '19. Unlike the other issue, which would be to be funded for that current year, these are going to be subsidized or actually paid out through the bonds, paid back through the bonds over the next 10 years. So there would be absolutely no impact to fiscal '19.
But there will be some money, pool of money allocated this year for some of this.
Well, it's the bond authorization. It would be the authorization for the city to
So we
go
don't
out
maybe
and issue those bonds.
necessarily need
So
to
this
incur-
would be bonded out, Mike, for,
But we don't need to incur those bonds,
2020.
particularly this year, that would give us those payments that we would have to pay the first payment in the spring.
No. We'd be issuing this spring. Any payments due on any bond authorizations wouldn't be due until fiscal '20.
Okay.
so it's 2020 that we'd have to
20,
begin
okay.
paying.
There would be no actual cost to the taxpayers
We'll
in
be
FY
through,
'19.
we'll be through 2019.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure, that we were going to be beyond July
We are.
1st of 2019 before we're paying any payment on any of these bonds.
The earliest we would be issuing would be this spring, of which the earliest any debt service or payments requirements would have a budgetary impact would be in fiscal '20.
But even if Mr. Souza were to move forward this winter with some of these park projects, does that timeline?
There would be no cost.
That timeline still stays in place?
It does.
Even if we move forward in 2 weeks or next week, tomorrow?
It does.
Okay.
There would be
Ju-
no additional cost.
Just for general purposes, Mr. Demus, give us an example of, say, this item here. How does it work? And then going forward, when does it begin payment schedule for that? Just so the viewing public can understand it.
Certainly. So, should this bond authorization be approved by city council, that would, in a sense, give the city a green light to start moving forward on these projects. But once we receive the approval, activity does not start immediately. We still go through all of the procurement processes. We still are seeking out to get designs completed, all funded through the debt. If we were able to dot our i's and cross our t's and assure compliance with Chapter 30 bid requirements, we've done our due diligence, we've selected contractors, and we've executed contracts, we would then issue debt in this upcoming spring. At that point, we wouldn't, once we actually issue the debt in the city, because we do have a very positive bond rating right now, we actually issue debt on the open market. We actually go out, we are not a member of a conglomerate where you have some communities that maybe have a lesser of a bond rating joining with communities that have a stronger one in a municipal bond bank. The city, we actually issue our own debt out on the open market. That wouldn't happen until this spring. Since I've been here, we only issue debt once a year. There's certainly costs associated with issuing debt, so I want to make sure that we're doing it once and only incurring those costs once. So we do that once a year.
That's smart.
As part of our issuance, the other thing that we work on is, because we do have a favorable bond rating, is that I always require a bond premium to be issued. So a premium to be paid by the people that are purchasing our bonds. We use those bond premiums, allowable by law, to offset the cost of the issuance. In addition, because we've had very favorable bond issuances in the past couple of years, what we've been able to do is we have more than generated sufficient premiums to cover the cost. We've actually also lowered the amount that we've actually had to raise. So whatever the net difference is what the city actually borrows. So last year, I believe we issued bonds totaling 13 million, but we're only paying back on approximately 12 million, because we were in a favorable place that allowed us to use those excess premiums to not actually go out and borrow the debt, to actually use that debt, use those premiums to basically pay back some of the actual authorizations. And so none of that will actually occur until fiscal '20. So if we issue in the spring of '19, which is where I'm anticipating of doing it, we don't actually start paying these items back until at the earliest fall of '19, which is in fiscal '20. So there would be no impact.
Which
to your
now,
question.
what, and not to cut you short, but the debt that's actually coming off. Is there any debt that's coming off that you can mention now?
Absolutely. I don't have the exact figures. I don't have those debt schedules in front of me as
Sure.
far as how much debt is actually going to be permanently retired through June 30. But every year, the city, like every other community, issues debt, and at the same time, during that year, because the city it has issued debt every year
Sure.
for the past 30, 40 decades, you always have debt that's been satisfactorily retired at that time.
And it
So-
revolves over and
it-
it comes off and this is a new one.
It does.
Okay.
So what we budget every fiscal year is the net amount of the premiums. So we take into account the debt service that came off and add in the new debt service that's coming on.
And currently, what's the bond rating now? What do we have, a AAA or?
I wish we had a AAA, we're working towards it. But we just were reaffirmed by Standard & Poor's from this last issuance of AA+,
AA+.
one step below a AAA rated community.
And what would be the procedure to go for the AAA? What would we have to do at that point?
I've laid out a plan with our rating agencies over the last couple of years.
And I find this germane, that's why I'm asking.
Sure. I've made it very clear to them that our goal was to attain a AAA rating, because once you receive that AAA rating, it's a less of a cost to the taxpayers paying back the financing of these projects. It's very much like your own personal credit rating. If you have a credit score of 750, you're going to get better rates. If you have a credit score of 550, you're going to be paying larger numbers in interest rates. So I've been working with the rating agencies over the last 3 years, trying to put the city on a path to get us to a AAA rating. Without getting into and putting you to sleep to all of the details,
We don't need the
one of the big things are your reserves, your stabilization, your cash reserves. They like to see you in that 20% range of your general fund operating expenditures.
Where are we now? Do you know with that?
I'm in the process of closing through fiscal 18. We certainly, I believe, as a percentage of our general fund budget, our expenditures, we're actually, I believe our reserves are going to be relatively flat. If not, they're going to fall a little bit. One of the things that the rating agencies get concerned with is when you use surplus or you use your equity to fund operations. It's one thing to use those funds to deal with one-time items. It's another thing when you're actually using surplus to fund operations. And it was actually one of the
They
items of
frown upon
concern.
that, don't they?
It was one of the items in our most recent rating this past spring.
Thank you for that information. Could we get a report from you when this is all done, and just to this committee, so that we would have some type of reporting back to us?
If you, absolutely, just let me know what you'd like in the report, and
Sure.
I'm happy to write it.
We'll discuss it, and then we'll go from there, but that would be great. Councilman McLaughlin,
Thanks, Colin.
you have a question to us?
Do.
All right.
A couple of these projects that I see before us are things that kind of are already sort of in the works. Suites of Circle Design, I mean, the casino project's kind of working on that. Beecham Street, they're kind of doing some work down there right now by widening the mouth of Beecham and Broadway. There's a couple of things on here that I sort of think are already in the works, and I'm not sure that we're allocating funding the best way by piggybacking off of that before we're seeing what they're doing on several of these projects, and then maybe going forward with, so 7 Acre Park is $50,000. We know we're not going to design 7 Acre Park for $50,000. So that's obviously something specific in that park that we're looking at to be able to design. But is that something that they're willing to be able to help us out with? Is that something that they're thinking about doing as far as, they talked about building a 10 acre park down there? versus a
Counselor,
7 acre.
I just for FYI for you, there was a form that was handed out. I believe that it has design and construction, so I don't know what that 50,000 for. Maybe they can explain it. That would be better.
Yeah, so, exactly, so 7 Acre Park design at $50,000. Item number 3 at the top, on the top section. So there's just a couple of those. Suites of Circle Design, I don't know if you guys can, so am I confused? Because I am sometimes, to be truthful. But we haven't talked about these projects directly. before, correct? We only have voted to accept the CIP as a whole, and we said when we came to allocating the funds that we would talk about these projects at that time.
That's correct, and that's the purpose of
Okay,
tonight's
so,
meeting.
so we have not zoned in on any of these projects previously, right? Because if it is, tell me to stop talking, to be honest. But I didn't think we had. So that's why I'm trying to get some understanding, because a lot of them, not all, a lot of them, but some of them happen to be in my ward, and I just wanted to understand them better. And I didn't think we had this discussion yet. So if you could just talk quickly on some of them, Mr.
Sure,
Sousa,
sure.
if that's okay with the chairman and my colleagues, just to understand them. I think it's good information.
Fire away, we're a fact-finding committee.
So, if I may, I'll start from where you started. Beecham Street design, Sweetser Circle design. Those two items we have in there for, it's item 12 and 13, Beecham Street 200,000, Sweetser 100,000. Those dollar amounts, throughout the year, we look for other funding opportunities, whether it be through grants or different earmarks that we get. The Beecham Street design and Sweetser Circle design, those amounts are placeholders. We may not necessarily need those funds, but I've requested that those be in there, so that way if any opportunities do come up, whether it be through grant, through earmarks, or through, again, federal or state funding sources, we'll tap into those prior to this. Beecham Street design, talked with Jay Monty, our transportation planner, last week with respect to this. This is to advance the designs to a certain level where we can put it in the state TIP. And the state TIP is the Transportation Improvement Plan. This is how we are securing funds for the Ferry Street project. Well, to get to that stage, you need to have plans that conform to Mass DOT's requirements. And unfortunately, that does, of course, require funds, requires money, requires survey, review, and so on to get to that stage. Beecham Street and Sweetser, we're working on both of those. Now, we have Ferry Street, not to divert, but we have Ferry Street on the tip for 2019, 2020. And the idea is, as Ferry Street progresses, we can tee up Beecham and improvements to Sweetser. You're absolutely correct. There's improvements being done today in those areas, certainly. But this is also, remember Beecham Street, we put in for a MassWorks grant. I recall way back that Councilor Matusky, when he was state rep, we put in for some funding there. We weren't successful at that time. And the feedback that we received was certainly to continue to advance designs, but we need to get to a certain level for Mass DOT to be able to program it within their capital plan. See, so this is in essence seed money to get us teed up there. If we don't do it this year, unfortunately, what happens, right? We're projecting out 4 or 5 years. It just kind of delays our projects. No. 7 Acre Park, 50,000 for design. Certainly that. And remember, when we put this together, that was back in February, March or so, when we had to put our CIP together. That money, 50,000, unfortunately, is not enough to design, let alone, an acre and a half, 7 acres. But that was some placeholder funds there to allow us. The idea with that is, and that's, we know, the Encore folks are enhancing, they're expanding 7 Acre with the playground and so on, and did ask to have some funding there. There is some work that we'll be doing in conjunction. For example, and not to go in great detail, but it's an item here, the tennis courts. The tennis courts down at the park right across from Waters Ave. Rossetti Park, thank you. The floor hockey structure will be removed, replaced down by the new playground. And as we know, that project, the playground and the floor hockey that Wynn is working on, that will be done by the end of May of next year. At this stage, which I mentioned in here, this is for tennis court renovation construction. Through my office, through our professional services, and through the general CIP, we've advanced, or we've started to advance some design work. The idea is so we have a seamless transition. So as that project, basically in short, we want to start that next spring so we don't have a gaping hole when the floor hockey, for example, moves over. Sure.
But what, and again, we can talk about this a little longer in detail, but what would we be starting at that park if we're gonna move those amenities into the 10-acre park and eventually down the road? What would happen to that site? What is the plan of the city for that site? Because
Sure.
it's not going to go back to an outdoor street hockey rink and tennis courts, and that whole area down there is going to be moved. into
Sure.
10
So your question at Rossetti Park, what's going to
Yeah.
happen after? Great question. So the tennis courts today, there's two there. They are not too standard for tournaments. So the idea was to add 2 additional tennis courts alongside. That's currently we have it in design as far as layout and so on. But the idea is so finally we can host high school tennis. That's the plan, the initial plan. Certainly, we haven't had any neighborhood meetings with respect to this component, but we will, as we have in other projects. So in a nutshell, those are 3, 4, just going over with you, but certainly happy to, I know there's a total of 13 items, happy to go over any one of them in even more detail.
Go ahead.
To the chair, if I may. And Counselor, you raised a good point. What this is before you is a bonding authorization. It doesn't mean I'm actually going to go out and issue the debt. There are a number of these. You talk about Beecham Street design and Sweetser Circle. I mean, Beecham Street is important for us so that we can do our work to get us on the tip. But we're actually still working with Tony Souza's office, still trying to obtain state funding for this. So even though the city council would authorize this, we still are actively pursuing any and all additional forms of funding
State,
so that we don't
federal.
actually have to issue the debt. It's not like we
Grants.
say, okay, we got the bond authorization, we can move forward. Mr. Souza and I have had these conversations many a times. We're still actively pursuing any additional federal, state aid, gifts, bequests that we could do to fund these projects. It doesn't mean that we would actually issue. Now, if we can't obtain additional funding, like either through federal or state grants, then that's when the bond authorization would kick in. But I just wanted to assure you that if there's money out there for us to be able to attain to subsidize and finance these projects, we're still going to actively pursue those.
No, and that's great. So I'm just, again, I'm sort of new, I guess, to this whole process, so I'm just trying to understand it. So the senator then got some funding for the Cavarian School tot lot, in the back of the Cavarian School tot lot that was not allocated for that project, or totally allocated, whatever the case might be. Is that funding that's available currently that we can move over to supplement in one of these park designs? Is that something that can happen? So is there a line item there that can be moved over to another design? If that purpose was for the design of the Cavarian School tot lot, but the project had already moved forward.
What was the question again, Counsel? I didn't hear that.
I apologize, I'm starting to lose my voice.
Sorry.
There was some funding that the state gave to the city of Everett for the Cavarian School tot lot that I'm not sure that was appropriated for or spent on that project. Could that money be shifted to, or moved to another one of these line items, so that we don't have to go out and borrow a full, if it's one project to the same project? If we're using it for the same purpose, just at a different location, can we move,
I would think, just from past experience, I would think if it's a line item scheduled for that particular tot lot or that particular name, it'd have to be utilized for that. Correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, but I think that's the standard on this one.
No, you're correct. That is the standard, not to say that there are not sometimes exceptions to the
Sure.
rules, but that is the standard protocol.
If it's line item, Counselor, it's line item for that particular, and that's the only thing that I believe they could use it for, so. Counsel, are you through? Because I think you have another, Councilman Matusky, did you have questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed that most of the parks in the city have been completely renovated. Most of them. Florence Street, the baseball field isn't done. Meadows, part of the field isn't done. Will this complete all parks in the city and tot lots? This bonding group here?
I wish it would. No, in our CIP, this is a series of projects. A list is of just of parks alone, 10 or so projects, but we have a series of other projects to follow as well in the subsequent years.
What parks are left to be done?
That's a great question. We have, for example, Lafayette Park is one. to do over. There are portions of, so for example, Florence Street Park Phase 2 would be on there.
Meadow, phase 2.
The Meadows Phase 2, we have on this one. It's in this batch here. Swan Street Phase 2. And there, Baldwin Ave is another one. And Shapiro Park, which we renovated maybe about 15 years ago or so, will be due down the road. Make sure I'm not missing any others. I know I am.
Well, the reason why I asked that question is because, you know, it's great that we have new parks. I mean, they've all been done, an aggressive renovation of our parks in the community.
They come
But,
out
you know,
good.
I was wondering, street and sidewalk repairs. What's the future of that bonding and capital improvements? Well, you know, I know we've got some rough streets in the city, and they may have a bigger priority than some of these parks. I just want to know, I'd like to see some streets. When is that bonding capital improvement plan going to be before us? Or is it, or been in before us?
The street and sidewalk appropriation was already before you in June. Because we live in New England, there's a short time frame to get the work done. And typically construction, street and sidewalk construction is completed by November-ish time frame. So that's already been before you. We have been working, and I will give you a very brief overview, and would recommend, if you're looking for an update, to get Mr. St. Louis, the DPW director, city engineer in. But we have a complete streets program that the city has implemented over the past couple of years. And the goal is to get every street within the city up to 100% for those streets that are not, and the streets that are at 100% to keep them at 100%. So one of the things that you're seeing a little bit differently late last year, early this year, and throughout this construction season is more maintenance work being done, such as seal coating and the like stuff that the city hadn't done in the past. But we do have a complete streets program where we're looking at all of the infrastructure that is underneath the streets. We're not doing any work on any streets unless we know that we've completed all of the water, sewer, gas line work. The gas line work threw us a little bit this year, but we are still on track. We were able to adjust accordingly so that we were able to continue to make those improvements over the course of the summer, and we're continuing through right now. But there is a complete streets program that is funded through appropriation as well as state grants. I think just this past year, through our Chapter 90 funds, we received about $625,000. And then we're working on additional state funding. You know, one of the ones that Mr. Souza was talking about is the Beach Street. You know, we got Ferry Street in on a tip, on the state tip. We want to get Beecham Street. The more funding that we can get, the more of our infrastructure that we can get funded through the state, and that's our goal. So we're trying to do our due diligence now up front, so that we put ourselves in the position to be able to seek any and all funds that's out there and available to the city.
And the other question, well, I appreciate all the information you provided tonight. You know, it's nice that certain departments give us the information we actually need to make a...
Well, we have good requests from here, that's why.
Yes, we do. Mr. Chairman, I have to say you do run a very tight meeting, and
We
I
have good
appreciate that.
requests.
Yes, you do. And, but I appreciate all the information. You know, when I do vote, I'm going to vote favorably, but we're not going to run into problems with these parks as we've had with one or two parks in the city. We're going to have a 3-year plan to complete a project. And I just want to say, well, we know about the park down on the Florence Street Park. We know that's been an issue. It does look great, I have to say, but, you know, 3 or 4 years is a long time. Cabot Street, Revere, Walcott Street is a mess, and it's been a mess for 3 years. I am not the kind of guy that votes for things that take that long to do. The casino will be built and completed before they finish that, and that's pretty pretty sickening, if you ask me. So my feeling is that, you know, it's nice to award these contracts to people, but, you know, you ultimately, Mr. St. Louis and, you know, the whole group there, you know, we don't look too good. I don't look good. That's my neighborhood. That has been a war zone, and it's ridiculous. As I said at a previous meeting a few meetings ago, Mr. President, and I only used former Mayor Ragucci as a time zone, my neighborhood was completely done in a month. Sidewalks, streets, and I understand you're running into things under the ground and all that, but, you know, the contractors have to take that in consideration. The water lines, I mean, it looks very confusing to me. But, you know, 3-4 years to upset a neighborhood is a little over the top. And I, for one, am going to keep a close eye on all of these projects that I'm going to vote for. And I also would like, Mr. President, you requested it, I think, that we get I'd like to know what our retiring debt is for the next few years. In other words, is the high school, did I hear that was, that bonding issue was almost paid off at this point or something? Or was that?
I can't tell you the exact date, but we're closer to paying it off than the beginning of the project.
Counselor.
But I can give you that debt schedule very easily.
At the request of what we're going to do at the end, we can actually add that on to it. We're going to add on, I want to know about the, how do we get to the AAA bonding, what revenue sources we have to build up and all that stuff as well, so that we can keep an eye on it as well here. Because this is what we do here, we control where the money's going somewhat and ask the questions of where it is going. So we should probably know everything that you have and what you need to
We can request
do.
it at the end of the meeting.
Yes,
But my intention with that is I'd like to know where we're at.
sure.
This is a 9.4 million expenditure.
Mhm.
And, you know, and I know it's not for this tax season here, but, you know, you hear reports of our taxes going up. And, you know, and I have a concern there. You know, it's nice to do all these beautiful things, you know, but we're a humble community at, you know, at any level here. You know, it's not changed the, you know, we are Everett. You know, it's great to have the new casino and all that, but people were anticipating paying a little bit lower in taxes, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman. And I, for one, was anticipating that. Not just the casino, but everything else is happening here. But that's, you know, and you have to, you know, it's nice to have all these good things happening in that community. And it has to be done, but the streets and sidewalks, there are some streets that I know are on that list that you talked about earlier. But the general public, you know, most of the people I talked to thought that taxes would be going down. And I know that the Exelon thing is happening, and I don't even want to get into that, but that's almost to the end. Am I correct on that?
I
really
apologize, I
can't
can't
comment
talk
on that.
about ongoing litigation.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's being litigated still, but,
We can't recall.
okay, so we'll leave that one off the table, but, you know, there are some good, bright lights ahead of us, but, you know, I will vote for these parks. I've never seen so many parks being done over. We're talking, now, I just want to point out one park, and it's in one of the nicest parts of Everett, the Fuller Street Playground. What cost $1 million in that small little tot lot, swings and a slide? What is $1 million worth of work there?
Thank you, Council. So item number 8, it's Fuller Street Park construction, but also includes Warner Park. And in essence, there'll be improvements to the crosswalks, sidewalks, fencing, Warner Park.
Warner Park is
The triangle,
where the gazebo is.
correct.
And that looks like it's been completed.
The gazebo's been completed, it's been landscaped, but the sidewalks and the connections to Warner
no,
Park need to be
It's not
improved.
completed.
As we all know.
It does look good. I have to admit, you did a good job down there. And that is really one of the nicest spots in the city.
That's awesome then.
But, you know, I was just a little concerned because I remember Councilwoman LaCours. She was a woman that was on the city council for close to 30 years. She lived a few doors away, and she got, and I don't remember it being, well, that was a few years ago, I have to admit, but it wasn't anything close to $1 million. It was more like 100,000, but I know. But it just seems like a lot of money for a small playground. But that's, I know that you have, but it includes other work.
Yeah,
It's 2 projects.
There's 2 projects there.
Through the chair, excuse me, Counselor, is there going to be lighting included with that, in that area?
For Fuller Street Park?
Yes, Fuller or one, either one, or both.
There's existing lighting, existing floodlights in that area.
Because I know, I recall back in the day, there were complaints about low lighting there and not being able to see into the park and all
Yeah.
that stuff at nighttime.
Yeah.
I want to avoid that if we can. I
And
just wanted to know
sure,
if there was gonna be
absolutely.
lighting.
Be happy to look into that. And when we get to a certain stage of design, we'll have a
Sure.
neighborhood meeting out there.
I think that what the chairman was talking, there was some
There was issues.
loitering and vandalism
Yeah, there
and
was
people
issues
hanging
with
around at
people in the
night.
park and the police not
Not
noticing they were there or
policing
whatever
it,
because it was
right.
too
Yeah,
dark.
yeah.
But not
But I'll end
outside.
my comments, Mr. President, but I will save, my request will be to get a list of what debt is being retired and how much, so that when other members of the council ask us why we're able to vote on this, we'll be able to tell them that, look, at next year, we're dropping this, we're dropping that, and I know a lot of things are coming up. How many things do we bond during, like, this is one group, we did the sidewalks, so that's be my last question.
Oh, no, you keep asking, who cares? Don't worry about it.
The city council also authorized capital improvements on vocational. There were actually 2 authorizations that happened there. And then the administration is anticipating 1 additional bonding authorization request through city council that has not been put forth. It's going to be the bulk of the vehicles that were included in the CIP that was accepted. However, prior to making that request, the mayor is meeting with each and every department head and requiring them to justify what their needs are, what can be put off. We're taking a look at what are the current maintenance costs on each of the vehicles. Some are very large, 8-wheel, 6-wheel dump trucks. Some are on the smaller side, but we're taking each and every one and requiring department heads to justify what those needs
So
are.
that's 3 different areas that we, this year,
This year it'll be 4
okay,
because of the vocational.
all right.
But they're taking a harder look at each department now, and they're going over with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that everyone's accountable now. That's why.
Well, Mr. Chairman, that's good to hear, because ultimately, people scratch their head, and other members that aren't on this committee are going to ask the same questions, as
Absolutely.
you know. And I want to be able to say that we left this committee with the information, and I really appreciate it. But as I said, there comes a time when we'd like to see taxes. I, for one, would like to see, all this stuff being done. But, in the big scheme of things, there are people here that are not thrilled with a tax increase, a high tax increase. Years ago, I just want to let these 2 gentlemen know that we were proud to have the lowest taxes in the state, just so you know. That's when we had some industry here that poisoned the ground and everything else, but, to make a long story short, we had the lowest taxes in the whole state at one time.
We did, at one
At least that's
point.
what at the time, And even if it went down a penny on 1,000, it was like that was the headline, and we were proud of that, believe me. But it's nice to see this work being done, but please remember that, we're a smaller community, it's only a little less than 3.5 square miles. We got to remember who we are, where we came from, and keep the taxpayers in mind here, Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Did Councilman Simonelli have any? Oh, okay. Councilman, yeah, Mr. Demus, Councilman Demus.
Just to also clarify, the original order before you was for $9,380,000. Mr. Souza had made a request to reduce that by $200,000. So that is the $9,180,000 number before you. And Mr. Souza didn't point that out, and I hadn't heard anybody talk about it yet. So I just wanted to make sure everybody that was clear.
Originally, this was, we had a discussion in the back, gentlemen, so I'm going to bring it to the forefront. We had a discussion in the back. Originally, this was at 12 million, and then it was reduced down, but that was for different items that were being utilized prior. Is that what happened? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, and in addition to that, the requests that actually from the departments that went into the mayor were tens of millions of dollars greater than what was actually even submitted. So there was approximately, and I'd have to go back and take a look at my notes, but it was closer to the $20 million range based upon all the requests that were submitted.
That was narrowed down to the 12, and then we narrowed it down even further to 9,180 now, right?
Well, it's not a matter of going from the 12 to the 9 because City Council had already authorized a piece of that back in June.
Sure.
In addition to that, outside of the CIP process, there was a $700,000 appropriation for the vocational. Once the bids came in, because the construction industry is so busy, the bids came in much greater than what we anticipated. So there was then another supplemental appropriation for the vocational to the tunes of $350,000.
Yep.
Now you have this order before you, which is the remainder of the park's open space is before you, and then we're anticipating one additional for the vehicles that were included.
And then, now to touch on Mr. Matusky's statement about the taxes, there was various incidences that we know of that produced that. So, we hope that we don't foresee that happening again, so. But yet, we don't know the future, so. Councilman McLaughlin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of follow-up questions I'm going
Sure.
to ask. Item number 1 on this list is citywide design and refurbish tot lots for $800,000. What tot lots? I mean, we have an extensive list of parks here listed through items 2 through 13, the majority of the parks. And we talked about the other parks that are not included on this year's CIP. So what additional tot lots are we looking at for the $800,000?
Sure. So if I may, the refurbish in part is, in prior years, it was around $700,000 or so. Refurbish, maintenance, upgrade, general standard updates to the existing tot lots. And we're going to be making a ADA compliant structure at Glendale Park, for example. So some of the funding would come out of that, couple that with an earmark that we received from the Senator's office. In prior years, this earmark was around $700,000. We use it for, again, ADA, winterization of a lot of the splash equipment. I think we're about 6, 7, or 8 splash pads in the city.
Those
and
not
we use
still
it
under
towards that.
warranty, Mr. Souza?
Oh, they're under warranty, but every winter.
Not even under warranty, I'm sorry, under maintenance contract. I apologize. Under warranty, I'm sorry.
Every year, sometimes we've done it in-house, given the complexity of the newer splash pads we have in the system. We're looking at contracting that out. It is a good standard practice to winterize, whether you do it in-house or out. But as I just mentioned, we have one park that there's multiple connections and so on. And frankly, this year we added three splash pads, if I recall, into the system, brand new. So it's important to.
So we're going out of house to winterize, winterizing these splash parks. They're probably the most important function we can do to these splash parks throughout the whole course of the year. Maintaining them in the summertime, you want the kids to enjoy them, of course. But if we don't winterize them correctly, lines are going to freeze and break all winter long, and you're not going to have a splash park in the summer. You're going to have a whole mess on your hands, and that happens very quickly. Just a trickling of water can cause a pipe to explode during the wintertime and sits there. Thaws, freezes, and it's going to be a mess in the summer. So I completely agree that winterizing is the most important. But I thought that would be done in-house. I know we hired a park superintendent this year for the first time in a long time. I know that we've gone in a different direction with our parks department. I thought we were going to bring that sort of work in-house under that individual's, job description and workload. Is that so? That's not happening if we're going out to contract for this, correct?
So that person's very instrumental in all the parks and all the organization and general maintenance of the park, but there are some specific things that when we look at with respect to winterization, and, you know, specifically Florence Street Park, the tremendous amount of work done in there and so
I
on.
mean, all of them are
And-
state-of-the-art park. right?
Exactly.
I've done irrigation blowouts in my life, whether it's a house or a commercial site, right? The parks 20 years ago was one line, you make sure the water's out and it's blowing the air through their
Right.
heads and you move forward. These things
Right.
are so high-tech now, you really need to understand the makeup of the system to be able to get it done correctly. So I agree. I just thought that some of,
And it's good to have professionals that do that all the time,
No,
with all respect, that handle sprinkler systems, for
Sure.
example. And there are companies that do that, and we've used them in the past, and it works best
Yeah.
when you have those folks.
so that's where that 800,000 is gonna go to.
It's comprehensive, but it's all different elements of it, yes, absolutely. And that's why there was an increase from prior CIP,
100,000.
again, because of the
But there's no additional
winterization.
park construction or design that will be under this 800,000 that is not listed in front of us?
Other than the ADAs at Glendale Park, and there may be from time to time, we do get some other requests for refurbishing certain tot lots because there's not an ADA feature in the park. We've been
What is
staying
the
on
grant
this.
that the senator was able to secure for us? Is it somewhere in the vicinity of 80,000, 60,000?
Counsel, I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman. I asked the grant that the senator got for the ADA appliance equipment at Glendale Park, which they're talking about, is going to be some of the $800,000. The state came in and gave us a grant to bring the swing set up to
code.
ADA
Yeah.
compliant.
Correct.
And I was just wondering what that number was versus how much it would cost to be able to put that in.
Sure. And so we put that project out to bid, and I'll be happy to get that to you. The senator's earmark was $75,000 that we received in the FY19 budget, and we're very, very grateful for that. It's an important match to it.
What did the bid come in at, do you know? And you don't have to be specific. You
Oh,
can tell me tomorrow. I don't
unfortunately,
care. It's okay.
Unfortunately, I wish that was 100% of the funding, but the bid came in, I want to say right about 164.
So imagine that, just think about that for a second, right? A swing set is $164,000 to put in one swing set in Glendale Park, right? That's a big,
To be in compliance.
right, that, you know, and those things add up, and that's what I was just trying to get at, that, you know, those numbers really are real numbers, and they add up quickly. You know, you'd think 75,000 is gonna be enough to put a swing set into a park, but it's not.
And if I may, and not to label this, but it's very important, more, and I don't want to lose sight of this, more than just simply, you know, swing set we get off the shelf at Home Depot, right? It includes the rubber surfacing and the other site furniture. And again, we put it out to bid. We've done these before, as you folks know, and we came in at about, I want to say about 164, but I can get the actual breakdown, just going off the top of my head.
And I'm gonna end this with one last question. Hill School Park construction, $1.5 million. As Councilman Matusky was talking about, the Meadows, Fuller Street Park isn't that big. We know the Hill School Park isn't that large either. It's a fairly small piece of land in the middle of two streets. Right now, currently, it's just a passive park with a bunch of grass and some benches in it. Are we planning on, for $1.5 million, you would think that you can do something, you know, big there, but I don't know what the thought of the administration is, if that's like.
So if I may, there's a little confusion here. So item 6 and item 7, Hale Street Park construction, no confusion on your part, but let me clarify. Central Ave Park construction, it's 1.5 for Central Ave, 1.1 for Hale. Central Ave and Central, I'm sorry, Hale and Central are right next to each other. Certainly, I'm not looking to exceed these amounts. My idea, my thinking is to put that out together. I did put target bid dates later for the spring in hopes that perhaps we get one solid contractor that could do both jobs simultaneously so we could economize the scale of the work and the mobilization. So it's Central at 1.5 and Hale at 1.1.
So the numbers are mixed up.
Yes.
But Central Ave Park is so you say it's right next to each other, but it's one street over. Am I thinking of the right park? It's on the corner of Woodland Road and Central Ave, and then the other one is on between Vernal and Glendale, right? The old Hale School, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So then it's one street apart from it, same neighborhood, same vicinity, but those are the two spots that we're talking about.
It's a 4-minute walk from each other.
Which is fine, because I just didn't know if you were talking about the parking lot along Burnell Street. I didn't know if that's what you were referring to. Because they put the park, and then they put a community parking lot there as well. I didn't know if that's
Right.
what you were referring to when you said right next to each other. I just wasn't sure if that's what you were referring to.
This references Hinkle Street.
Yeah,
There is no.
It's-
right, well, exactly.
It's Vernal, it's in between Vernal and Glendale.
The Old Hill School, I went to
Yeah.
elementary school there, it's the Old Hill School
Yeah.
site, right? Okay.
And I
It is
don't-
no longer there, though, Counselor.
No, it's no longer there, you're right, it's a nice passive park now with
It
grass.
is no longer there.
And
So what are we gonna do on that site? Are we just gonna bring it back to the passive park that has green space and benches, or are we looking to make it an active park?
Well, it's certainly under design. We'd like to add more activation there in the park. It's a beautiful, beautiful park. We'd love to see a sort of a multi-family park, all generations are for seniors, for the children.
Thank God, because it's in my ward.
Options of community gardens, things of that. I'm really excited for those two projects.
I'm excited too,
honest
to
with
be
you.
honest, because I grew up in the neighborhood,
Excited.
Councilman McKinnon represents the neighborhood. I always thought that park was underutilized. I just thought we could do so much more for that neighborhood.
There's a lot of, you know what it is there that's nice, is there's a lot of big trees there.
Yeah.
The bigger trees, people like to hang out underneath there. It's a nice little
So I'm
spot.
glad to hear that there'll be more amenities and more added features to that park. I just want to thank both of you for your time. It's been really informative. I'm sorry, Mr. Demus, I apologize.
Just a thought, just to, if you had that potential confusion or not clarity as to where we were doing it, I would make a recommendation.
Yes.
If you are going to recommend to move forward, change the name. We're fine with changing the name of the project, if that would provide additional clarity.
Sure.
It's not too late to do that.
It's not Hale Street, it would be the old Hale School site. So we should probably amend that, if we can amend it.
So I'll put that in form of a motion right now, that we amend item number 6 from Hill Street Park to the site of the old Hill School. site?
Motion made and seconded to amend this to the old Hale Street School
The old Hill School
lot.
site.
And all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed, the ayes have it. You have done so.
And take action to remove item number 2.
And we'll make a,
Second motion on it, to remove.
Which is the Webster School, the 200,000, that tot lot.
That was an error. We already did that.
You want to
Okay,
remove the
I
200?
apologize, right. So I'll make a motion that we strike item number 2 from the record on this sheet, spreadsheet.
Motion made and seconded to strike item number 2 on the spreadsheet. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. You have done so. Those two motions have been,
Councilor
Councilman Simonelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councilman Simonelli's interpreter will be back from Italy tomorrow, but he would like to know, what happens if the council doesn't approve this request? What will happen to all those parks? Will they still be worked on? And this is nice, but we can use the money to benefit the people's needs. And the last sentence is, what is more important at this time?
I
Did you get that?
Yeah, I can actually chime in. What we've been saying tonight is this will not impact anything for this year at all. This will reflect on, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Demus, and this will definitely reflect in 2019 or 2020?
It would have an impact on your 2020 operating budget.
2020. So, Counselor, what this would do is it would impact 2020, but it would be, what we're looking for in the form of a motion after is to have Mr. Demus provide us with a list of any funding that's coming off of the debt, and we want to see this is the refunding that would be going on as the debt for 2020. So he'll give us an accurate list on that.
Through the chair, the only thing to offer is, part of that question was, would there be any work done on these parks absent of an affirmative vote? And the answer would be no. Without an authorization,
You'd kill it.
you can't perform the work. I would need I would need a legally binding authorization for us to allow any expenses to be
To
incurred.
go out to bond or anything, correct? Councilman McLaughlin?
Mr. Chairman, apologize. Again, there's some, and I echo my colleagues in the concern of the taxpayers, and we're spending a lot of money here. This is a big number to take under our consideration, $9.1 million. And unfortunately, we've heard in recent news reports that an 11% tax increase could be faced in our community again this coming year, right? That's a concern when we look at this. So you have to really think about how you want to spend your tax dollars and where you want those tax dollars to go, right? And we all want great parks and beautiful streets and nice neighborhoods, absolutely. But at what point can we really afford to do this? And that was why I asked originally at the beginning of the question is, could we hold back on a few of these projects? Could we put the brakes on a few things? Or is there timelines that funding needs to be in place so that we can apply for state grants, or that we can match state grants that are needed to be matched to be able to get state funded? Or because again, both of my colleagues, all three of my colleagues, make great points. We hear it every day from the taxpayers, especially the seniors in our community. Councilman Matusky's highly in tune with our seniors, and he hears it all the time from seniors. They can't afford to continue to pay more, unfortunately, right? We don't want to squeeze those people out of our community. We don't want to push them out of the city. $9.1 million is not something to just shake a stick at. It's something to take serious, something to look deep and hard at. I'll be honest, I'm ready to make a motion, and I don't know my colleagues want to do this, but I would table it for another meeting so we can dive into some more of these projects. We talked about $800,000 and what that will go to in a big overwhelming nutshell, but we don't know zoned in what the contracts will be to winterize those projects, what projects are going to be winterized, where that $800,000 is going to. I'd like to understand more of this before we're appropriating $9.1 million, because I think it's our due diligence to the taxpayers of the city, and you guys feel the same way. You guys work for the same people we work for. That's the residents of the city. To be able to understand this is our job, and to make sure that we're making the best decision. And unfortunately, Councilman Matusky hit the nail on the head. We can sit here for 3 hours tonight. It's going to go out to the floor, and we're going to sit there for 3 more hours, unfortunately, because the same questions are going to be asked. And good for our colleagues, because they have a right to have the same discussion, and that's why I thought they should have went to committee of the whole in the beginning, because my colleagues that are not here tonight, it's not their fault that they're not here. They're not on this committee. They're going to have the same questions or similar questions that we're going to ask tonight, because everybody's watching out for the taxpayers. The administration is, and so is the city council. So, again, I don't want to rush through this. I really don't. If we want to stay here longer, there's more questions to be had. And I can either do it here, I can do it on the floor. It doesn't matter to me. It's 6 half dozen the other. But I think we need to really carefully think this through before we're appropriate. Because we have other bond items that are going to come before us. As we talk about vocational school, the new vehicles, right? The mayor is doing his due diligence to try to zone in on that. But that's going to be a number of some magnitude at some point that we're going to have to be able to take on. What if the schools come to us and says, the 4 programs we're doing in the vocational is wonderful, but we want to be able to expand it because the state thinks that we're, doing wonderful work. Are we going to look at that down the road and say, do we offer more programs by allowing more funding to be allocated through a bonding rate that would be paid over 10 years? Does it make sense now to do that? So I think we really need to do our homework and due diligence on this. And I think it's a great discussion we've had here tonight. I think we've got a lot of answers, but I think there's more to be had, more to be discussed. So I don't know.
Gentlemen, on this, Council, on this through the chair, is there any time deadlines on this? And be specific. I mean, if this is going to hold things up, we need to know. If not, then we need to know which way we're going to go here. So be precise.
We have target bid dates for January.
I mean, although I understand, and we went over the ground where it's not going to impact till 2020. We understand that. And that's the biggest issue now that I have. And I know that we will have debt coming off, but we're also having debt coming on. So, and that won't impact till 2020?
Yes.
So, all right. But is there anything relevant now to a time frame that we need to be at?
The goal is I'm looking to get most of these projects out to bid January 2019. We're in October now.
If they don't go out to bid in January?
Well, it's not just my wish. It's so we can get rolling in the spring
The question,
construction.
I-
But it's just the administration's desire to be able to move forward as soon as possible on these. It's not a timeline that is saying money has to be here for X, Y, and Z date to be able to match a grant or to be able to apply for an
Do
additional.
we have, in other words, through me, Mikey, what I want to know is now is if we waited another meeting, would that hold you up?
Not
To
necessarily.
get the answers that these gentlemen want, or, you know,
Not necessarily, no.
okay.
No.
So we're not under the gun for a time frame. Okay,
No.
thank you.
It's here in the audience, and maybe one of my colleagues can answer. Could we refer this to a committee of the whole from this committee? Instead of going to
No.
the floor and having our colleagues ask
You
the
can't.
questions on the floor?
Procedurally,
We
no.
can't refer it.
We got to come out with a finding, and it goes to the whole.
The council has the authority to do it as a whole. That's how it works.
So we would refer this to them, and then we, as the whole, vote on it to go to a whole, or just to discuss it that night. So, with our recommendation out of it. Can make a motion for it. but-
Or you could refer to a special meeting. So you could also put them.
What's your,
If it's a special meeting, the recommendation is to refer to a special
yeah, and then it goes to the regular meeting. That comes out on Monday. And then once everyone's here, we all vote on it, if we want to go to a special. And then at that special, then everybody comes back, and then we can do it that way. But this, we've found out some good information here within the committee, so we want to come out with a recommendation out of this committee before we do something to where we're saying we want a special, I would think.
Well, also have to get help because they could, a couple of councils. The closed pack everybody has.
Oh, yeah. It's just, it's going to open it up anyway to an open meeting, so. Put it this way, it's entirely up to us what we want to do with it. So if we want to send it back with recommendations, or if we want to hold it here to see if we need more answers to the questions of our colleagues, the answer for them, we could do it either way. It's up to you. I don't, me particularly, without the timeframes on it, I don't care. You know what I mean? So if there's no stringent timeframes that they have to meet, which there's not, and they have already decided that there's not,
I
We have
I
time.
echo comments. I just think that if we heat this in committee here, at some point, we're going to have to address it there. At some point, we have to address it in a bigger,
sure. I
a
mean,
bigger body.
it's gonna happen one way or the other. We could spend 3 hours here and then another 3 hours in, our committee meeting like we usually do, and, nothing really gets accomplished that way, but that seems to be the way it's been going this year.
You're already into the mid.
It,
Then if there's a lot of issues, you're already into the month of December.
Yeah, so we don't want to be putting a time restraint on these guys either, if we're going to just vote on it anyway. Hold on one second. I just heard from Mr. Cornelio on it, and he suggested that we could put it out to have the special meeting, out at the regular meeting. They vote on it, we have a special meeting, we invite these gentlemen there, but we do it in a timely fashion to where it's not going to impede on them. That would be the recommendation. Does that work, gentlemen?
no, it absolutely does. I just wanted to offer, once I started hearing, moving into late November into December, Mr. Souza's correct. We don't have any immediate time constraints on us right now.
But you will.
But if you do move forward and decide to do some of these projects, it's in the city's best interest that Mr. Souza get these
Sooner
bids
than
out
later.
in January. But number one, before quality firms get booked up for the summer. And number two, we have more leverage People are more aggressive in their bidding very early in late winter, early spring. It would not be ideal to go out to bid mid to late spring on these items because we're going to preclude ourselves from certain
Sure.
contractors, and sometimes contractors just throw out larger amounts because they already are busy.
In all fairness to our colleagues that are not here and present, because I know they'll probably have a slew of questions that they want. They were the ones that put it into this committee, so I think that we should give them the entitlement of that. And without the constraint on the time, we have a little bit of time to actually get these things done, and we can actually vote on it either, that night? That night, and then it's done. So it will go one way or the other, but it would be having a majority of our people there anyway to ask the questions that they need to, because I'm sure it'll go out to the main meeting. We've already sat here for an hour and something, and then it'll go for another 3 hours in debate at our regular meeting. So instead of doing that, we might as well just have a separate meeting for it, and then everybody can answer have their questions answered, and then we can move forward. Yeah, and it's a 2/3 vote, so it would be 8 votes that you need on it, so, which, I mean, the way that it was explained here tonight, anyway, the impact is not going to be seen till 2020. We just need to furbish that over again and make them understand that, and then quell any of the problems that they would have with it. But, and understanding that it's not going to impact the 2019, so. That's the only concern I think that they're really going to have with that. And it's a number, it's a big number, but that we don't have the numbers of the flip side of what's coming off either, whether it be schools, whether it be other items that are going to be coming off that are substantial too. So once we have that, we'll have a better understanding as well. So my motion would be, number one, is if we could get a written response back from you, Mr. Demas, on what debt is going to be coming off. If we can get it up maybe in a timely fashion before that meeting so that we can hand it out to all our colleagues and get that done through Mr. Mangan. And also, what steps or accounts do we need to refurbish or improve to get the AAA bonding? And the bond rating that we want on that is the AAA, reason being is that that'll alleviate the tax burden on the taxpayers at that point. So those two things I'd like to have, as well as, and then we'll kick this out to, with a recommendation of a special meeting.
Mr. Chairman, if I can ask for one more clarification, that's on item number 1 of the $800,000. If they can give us a breakdown of that $800,000, it's almost $1 million. It's a lump sum.
Where is that?
Item number 1 on
Okay.
on the list. If they could break that down for us, just to show us where that $800,000 is going to go. $800,000.
If we could have that clarification, Mr. Souza. If you could do presentation of all the numbered items, so that we have it all, just in case anyone has any additional questioning or anything like that. That was a good idea, thanks. Then we have it all, it's right out in the open, there's, see transparency at its finest hour.
Certainly. And actually, because these items have already been before City Council and Ways and Means, if there are additional questions you have in the interim, please submit them, and we'll make sure that they get addressed that evening.
So if we can get those two things, the debt and the improvements to the accounts, and then if we can get them out in copy form to Mr. Mangan before that meeting occurs, that'll be great. And then we'll invite you gentlemen back.
Before next Monday's meeting?
No, the special, it'll go to next Monday's meeting. Yeah, well, you
So
have
if
time.
I have it ready for Monday, I'll be
Yeah.
fine.
You have ready before Monday or whatever. You still have time. So the recommendation is this: we're going to have them fortify us a written report on these two items here, and then we're going to put this out to the regular meeting for a special meeting. That's our recommendation. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those in favor? All those opposed? The ayes have it. Did you have a question, Mr. Simonelli? Okay. All right.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. Councilman Simonelli would like to know, what is the difference between the difference of this year and next year regarding this, with this appropriation?
From 2019 to 2020, correct?
The total CIP approved?
The difference between, does it matter that,
Oh, okay. Why can't we do it next year compared to this year?
that's what the
Okay.
question is, yeah.
And the answer, gentlemen, why couldn't we do it next year? Because you want to get a jump start on it this year, so it can fall into 2020 funding. Is that the right answer? I don't want to answer for you, but that's pretty much what. And then it would be less expensive towards the taxpayer at that point?
Right.
Okay. So,
Got a notice for a hearing,
so that, we'll take a vote on that. We're gonna send this out. The clarity, is that clear enough for you, Councilman Simonelli, or no? Did you get all the answers you wanted? Okay. The vote would be that we send this out to the regular meeting and get a special meeting, on a vote from them for a special meeting. All those in favor? All those opposed? The ayes have it. Motion to
You got to go to the back room.
we have to
Reconvene in the
reconvene
back
to
room.
sign in the back room, all the warrants?